Okay, so till now we have seen web UI testing with manually we have seen, and also with Selenium how to do we have seen. And now without UI, we can do functional testing, performance testing, security testing, all kinds of testings with the API testing. So with APIs, you can do all kinds of testings. Even without UI also, you can do a testing. How is it possible? So you might get an idea. You might get a question on that also. So I'll just give you before going to that in detail. So first, let's understand what is a client and server. Basically, this is one of your computer which is connecting through a DNS server, okay, through internet. So when this IP address will move to this wherever you are requesting, which server you are requesting, that will go and send back the output to you whatever you are requesting. So this is all clients, we call that. So basically a connection point for several clients. So server is nothing but this is the server, and which is a connection point to the many clients. And so what this server will do is, server basically handles the request which is going to come to the server. The request is sent by the client. Client will keep sending the request, and server will give that response to client. And the client is just another small laptop or desktop, anything. And that's the difference between client and server. So what is any web application architecture is, there are three layers. So one is presentation layer, application layer, and data layer. The presentation layer is designed by HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So basically, presentation means you can see the UI. That's a UI part, this one. So that you can design with these technologies. And the business logic, application logic will be written with different programming languages like Java, .NET, C#, Python, C++. All these languages are used to write the business logic, to build the application layer, to build the business layer. And to store your data, we have a database layer. So MySQL, Oracle, Postgres, SQL Server, and MongoDB. These are the different databases where you can store your application data. So any data you can store here. That's the third one, is the data layer. These are the three layers will be there for any web applications. It's a common. But there are some without this we can build initially. Without UI, you can build these two. So that is called API. So what is mean by API? So application programming interface. So basically, which is going to exchange the data between two separate systems, and communication happens between two different systems. That is called an API. So API is, it just transfers the data from one point to another point, or one layer to another layer, or one system to another system. The communication happens between the two systems by these APIs. And you can see all the examples, like whenever you go any online website, you're purchasing a product, and it will be interlinked to your bank. Your payment will happen. So there is no direct, software, bank software won't be established in the website or Amazon or whatever it is. But they will send the API request to the bank with all the valid credentials, valid data, and then so bank will send back the respective response. So that's how it is happening. All this is happening through APIs only. And even if you see you want to book a flight, if you go to any booking flight websites, so it will fetch all the flights info for you. Which date, what, how many seats are there, what is the price, everything. It will fetch for you different flights data. How is it possible? Their software is different and this software is different, right? So this all designed by APIs. So that's the advantage of APIs. Even you can talk to two different systems, even if you don't build also. That's the advantage. The example is Google Maps API, Amazon Advertising API, Twitter API, YouTube API. So all these are examples for APIs. And best example I told you, like, paying your online payment through credit cards, debit cards, or net banking, or wallets, anything. All this is happening through APIs only. So that's the API advantage and where it is used. So nowadays, there are two kinds of application, but everything is now migrating to microservices concept. So before there was a monolithic architecture. What is monolithic architecture? Your entire application code will be in one server only. Everything. And that is going to cause a lot of problems. Okay, if you make change in one area, you have to test everything again and again. So that's a lot of burden. And if somebody deploys and everything, if that code is not good, it will be disturbed by everybody, even other teams also. That's a monolithic applications. Now, slowly people are completely moving from monolithic to microservices. So what is this microservices? Meaning itself is there, microservices. For every service, one module will be prepared. So that is called microservice. And that microservice will work independently. Like if you observe, so any kind of goibigo.com or so any makemytrip.com or anything. So you see, you have a flight services, you have a hotel services, you have different other services also, rental services, different services. So this is each one is a different microservice. So they will build like that different microservices, and it will act independently. And each service team, they can work independently. So they can deploy, they can make changes. You don't need to touch other services. So you don't need to test other services if you make changes here. So that's the advantage with this microservice concept. So that's why very popular nowadays, microservice concept. So when these microservices came, this API popularity increased. So the main advantage of microservices, independently you can deploy the code and you can test the code, and you don't need to test other modules, other microservices. If something happened in this particular microservice. So it's a very less burden to that team. That's the microservice concept, and very useful, these microservices. And nowadays everybody building microservices only, every company. And every company building microservices, there will be an APIs, mandatory. And these based on these APIs, they will they will do all kinds of activities. You can create, you can update, you can get the information, you can delete the information. All CRUD operations you can do. CRUD means create, read, update, delete operations. All these operations you can perform without even application also. So like you want to create any account, there is a post call. You want to update, there is a put call. And you want to get the information, there is a get call. And if you want to delete anything, any resource in the server side, you have a delete call. So like that, we have CRUD operation. HTTP verb methods are already created. Those will serve all these CRUD operation tasks. So that's how microservices are working. How microservice communicating is. So every one microservice, other microservice communication happens through these APIs. Then how do they know? So you will give a authentication. One endpoint URL will be there. One authentication, so credentials you will give. So these are all you need to provide, whether that is a authenticated and genuine one or not. How do they know? So that's why they will request, okay, give me a token, authorization token. So if you send a proper authorization token, then that service will accept your request and it will process there and you'll get the information back to you. So that's how these microservices are going to work and communicate with each other through these APIs. So what is this web service? So, okay, API is there, fine. What is this web service? So web service is another a system which is designed to support different machine-to-machine interaction over the network. So over the network, the machine-to-machine interaction will happen. So that's the web service. But for APIs, you don't need, okay? So you don't need internet also. You can, so even those are free open source also APIs. Like your all Selenium APIs are open source. You just download and add to your project and you can work independently. You don't need an internet to use those APIs, free APIs. But web service is not like that. So you should have internet to communicate between two different systems. So the communication can be done either XML or JSON messages over HTTP protocol. There will be a protocol and there is a message formatting that can be XML or JSON format you have to give. So let's see what is the difference between web services and APIs. All web services are APIs, but all APIs are not web services. So web service is only three style of communication. One is SOAP, REST, XML, RPC for communication. And API may use any style for communication. And web service is self-contained. So APIs are open source and can be used anywhere. So web services can be hosted on the internet information services, and API can be hosted within the application or IaaS also. So web service might not perform all operations that API performs, but API can perform all the tasks that web services can do. So it requires a SOAP protocol to receive and send data over the network. And API is a lightweight architecture and good for devices which have a limited bandwidth and like mobile devices. So this is very useful. But nowadays, even anywhere, this API is used widely. And web services needs a network, and API doesn't need network for its operations. So that's the difference between web service and API. This is one of the famous interview question also. So what is API testing? Because we're building the APIs, right, on the business area, this business logic area. So they will build the APIs. That APIs, how do you know they are working, right? So whether they are functionally working or not, how do you know? So to check that, we're going to use APIs. So to test the APIs, so we'll use different processes and different protocols and different HTTP verb methods will be used. So what kind of testings you can perform? So you can perform functional testing, reliability testing, performance testing, security testing. All these kinds of testings can be done with APIs. So that's API testing. API testing mainly focus on business layer, business logic area. So what are the advantages of API testing? So API testing provides access to the application without user interface. That means without UI. You don't need a UI, and then you can access the application. So though you can test code level functionality, so whether it is working or not, and so that you can detect the minor issues or early functional issues before going for the functional UI testing. Okay, so that's easily you can catch the bugs in very early stage. That's the advantage with the API testing. So API testing is, so generally it takes a very less time than functional GUI testing. And also it's very, very faster. You can write a less code and and execution is very faster and compared to UI test cases. Because UI test case will take some time, right? It has to open a browser, application, then navigate to different pages. It takes time. But API testing is very, very fast. So even fraction of seconds, you will get the output. So that's the advantage with the API testing. So API testing, data exchange is happened through XML or JSON. So it's a JSON or XML is a language independent. It doesn't matter which language you're using, and it will work for all kinds of programming languages. So that's the communication exchange, data exchange will be done either JSON or XML. So, sir, I don't know what is XML, what is JSON. So don't worry, I'll tell that. You might hear about HTML, right? So HTML, the pages are designed by HTML, right? Same, there are predefined tags will be there in the HTML. But XML means you can create your own tags. That's advantage with XML. And JSON is another JavaScript object notation. It's a lightweight architecture, and it's basically data will be exchanged between the two different layers. One is client and server. Between that data will be transferred. That is done by JSON. It's irrespective of language, it will work. So that's the main advantages of APIs. What is the difference between API testing and unit testing? So API testing is conducted by QA team. Unit testing is conducted by development team. So API testing is a black box kind of testing, and unit testing is a white box testing. So API testing is basically you will do a full functionality of the microservice, and unit testing is you're testing each unit, each function, so that development team has written, you're going to test. So like yesterday we have written, right, the different functions. Each function you can test it with a dummy data or data you can give. That's a unit test. So A/B testing is, so can be run once you get the build from the development team. So once so you will get the build. On the build, you will execute the APIs. So unit testing is, so once the developer is written code, and he will, in his machine itself, he will test his functions with the unit test cases. That's the unit testing means. That's the difference between API testing and unit testing. So what are the different features of web services? Like, we have interoperability, reuse already developed modules into new software. So you can easily, integrate So the code that is already there, already somebody developed, and you can integrate with your application. So you can extend to different levels. So that's the advantage of features of web services. So there are two types of web services. One is SOAP, RESTful web services. SOAP and RESTful web services. So I'll just give you a brief introduction about SOAP, but we're not going to discuss more on SOAP. So we'll focus mostly on RESTful web services, because nowadays everybody uses a RESTful web services only. So SOAP stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. Simple Object Access Protocol. So it basically exchange information using request and response in XML format only over different protocols, HTTP and SMTP protocols you will use. That's the SOAP means. So there are different components of SOAP. One is Simple Access Object Protocol, Web Services Description Language, WSDL we call this, and UD, so Universal Description, Discovery, and Integration. So another component. These are the three components are there in the SOAP web service. So WSDL is the very crucial component in the SOAP. So WSDL means Web Service Description Language. So it's an XML file. So basically it describes the technical details of how to implement the web service and what kind of URL you have, what is the port, which method need to use, what are the arguments and data types. So you need to use that. Everything will be defined in the WSDL file. So WSDL is a one file, XML file. In that file, they will define, so okay, what is the endpoint URI, what is the port, which port this endpoint will run, and what is the method name, get, post, put, delete. These are the methods. And you have, okay, so if there is a parameterized method, what is the arguments you need to pass? All that input message format, output message format, security protocol, and which protocol so the web service is going to use, all this information available in this WSDL file. Okay, so that's the WSDL means. And there is a UD. Basically, this is the universal description, discovery, and integration. What is mean by this? So basically a directory service. So when you are sending a request, that request will be registered in this UD. And then that will be served to the, so whatever the request you have already, that will be served by this UD. It's just a registry kind of thing. And that's the UD concept. So this we don't want much, so don't worry about that. SOAP testing tools are, we have a SOAP UI, UFT, JMeter, and even you can use Ready API. So different tools are there. We can use any one of them to do a SOAP testing. Yeah, the final one, to what we are going to discuss mostly is RESTful web services. So what is mean by RESTful web service? It's an architectural style which is initially found in 2000 by Roy Fielding in his medical thesis. And REST means representational state transfer, so which is a communication happens between the client and the server using a HTTP request. And there are HTTP verbs or HTTP verb methods, we call them. Those are called get, post, put, delete. So get, post, put, delete. So we'll discuss in detail about this, these four, and if you know these four, that's good enough for us. So it transfers the information from one client to the server with a different parameter, and by passing the input data, and you will get the output either in the JSON format or XML format or a text format or HTML format. So different formats you can get the data. So, and what is mean by this? So this HTML and the HTTP work methods, different HTTP work methods. So before going to that, let me give you the difference between SOAP and REST. So what is meant by SOAP and REST difference? This is another interview question. Please have few points at least, the difference between SOAP and REST. SOAP is a XML based protocol and REST is a architectural style protocol. SOAP uses WSDL to communicate between a consumer and provider, and REST uses an XML or JSON to send and receive the data. SOAP calls the RPC method to invoke the services, and REST calls services via URL path, URL. So endpoint URL will be there. So that's the main. So you will hit the endpoint URL, and then you can access the REST calls, REST services. SOAP result is not human readable, but REST. So results are human readable. It will be in the XML format or JSON format. So even a SOAP also you can read. So in the XML format, it will be there. You can read, not that thing, but more readable will be available in the JSON format if you do. SOAP transfers over HTTP and or SMTP, FTP also, and REST transfers using HTTP only. And performance of SOAP is less compared to REST, and performance wise REST is more speed and it is effective than SOAP. So basically any microservice and the REST architecture is, so when you request, there is a client and server. So when you send, first your request is going to have the request method and the URL. Then you have a authorizations, headers, request body will be there, and then you will get a response. So that's any REST API architecture. Okay, so if you see this this diagram, how REST API is there. So your request will go from client to server, and you'll get a response back any of these formats. So there is an example you can see. So this is all REST endpoint URL. HTTP API flickr.com services REST question mark method photos get info from this ID. So that means this is the resource ID. It will be available in the server. So from that server, you are getting the response. So based on this ID. So there are so many photos. How can you get particular photo ID information? So by giving that photo ID. So this is the request of any REST API structure. So if you see here more clear, so your request will be like this. This is the HTTP protocol. And this is the host. So the server, okay? This is the server URL. Then this is the resources. Resource means, so every object which is going to store in the server, that's a resource, we call that. So the resources is represented like this. And you will get a response back. So that's a request and response. And see that first you will supply a HTTP verb method. So get, post, put, delete, and the request URL. The request URL I have shown you on the top, right? So this is a request URL. So with a protocol, host, and resource will be there, and you will get a response back. So that's the main how your REST API format, how it will be there. These are all, this is the main important. What is URI? So what is URL? So these are the questions, they will ask in the interviews. So URI is a uniform resource identifier. So basically, which is going to have a sequence of characters to identify the resource by its location or name or both on the internet. So that's the URL. So basically URI is used to identify your resource. So by name, by location, or by ID something. So that's the URI. And so to identify the resources, we are using URIs. There is one more URNs, uniform resource names, URLs, uniform resource locators. So both are there. So some of the examples of this URN is this one. And so this is the URL, URI, so examples, these are all. And what is URL? URL, you already know, this is a URL, right? Uniform resource locator. Right? Uniform resource locator is basically a sequence of characters that identifies the network location of that resource. So that's the URL means. So this is the URL. So travel.com, something. So URI is a bigger one, and part of the URL is part of URI. So URI is an example for your name, and URL is your address. So that's the difference between URI and URL. This is another interview question. Make sure before going for interview, all these small differences, API versus web services, SOAP versus REST APIs, and URI versus URL. Make a note of all this. So URI is a resource identifier. URL is a resource locator. And URI is a superset of URL. And URL is a type of URI, one of the type. And it is often utilized in XML and tag library files. And URL is often used to find the web pages, right? This is the URL. So basically, it will find the web pages. So primary purpose of URI is to identify the resource and differentiate it from other resources. So either by its name or location or both. The primary goal of URL is to get the address of or location of the resource. And so that's it between URI and URL. And what is a resource? Resource is basically a physical component, and so which is going to store in the server. So which is going to store in the server that you can identify. So that's a resource. Suppose consider a real-time example of motorbike. So wheels, brakes, headlights, fuel, and etc. All these are resources of a motorbike. So all resources have a names, right? Like how you can identify. So wheels, brakes, headlights, all these are the resources of motorbike. So like, another example is Google. You take a Google, like we have a /maps. In the last of google.com /maps, if you do, so that's maps is the one of the resource in the Google thing. And news, another resource. Google will launch Google News. If you give, instead of /maps, you give /news, and it will open this news. So there's a maps, news, so these are all the different resources, which has a name, right? Basically a name. And most important thing is HTTP verb methods. Get, put, delete, post. So what is a get method? So basically it retrieves the information from the server. That's a get method. So what this get method will do, it retrieves the information from the server. put method. So basically, you have a resource, you want to update the resource data, resource information. Then you will use a put method. So delete, it removes the resource, okay, from the server. Post, so it is used to create a new resource in the server. Then you will use a post method. So it's not idempotent. It's not idempotent. So what is mean by idempotent? So idempotent means when how many times you request same endpoint with that verb method, the state of that resource is not going to change. That's idempotent. But post method, when you use, every time it will create a new resource ID. How many times you call? That many times it will create a new resource. But get to, put to, delete, no. So same will be updated, same will be get value. So if you call get multiple times, it will get the same information to you. If you try to update the same, for example, your Aadhaar card, last name you want to change, keep on updating the same will be updated. So delete, you want to delete the resource, it will be deleted. But post is not like that. It will create every time a new resource. So that's the difference between get to, put to, delete to, post. Okay. So let's join back and we'll continue further how to. So with the detailed examples.